Hello and welcome to our presentation titled Durational and Pitch Marking of Rhetorical WH Questions in Mandarin. In this presentation, we focus on the semantics-prosody interface of information seeking and rhetorical questions in Mandarin. We'll first provide relevant background that motivated our research questions, and then we move on to the design and results of our experiment before concluding the presentation. Let me walk you through the semantics of rhetorical questions first. We ask information-seeking questions when we don't know the answer, and we ask our addressee to provide it. Formally, rhetorical questions are just like information-seeking questions. They are interrogatives. They can be WH interrogatives or polar ones. But we ask rhetorical questions for a different purpose. We ask them to underline the answer to it. So we ask them when we already know the answer, and we think the addressee knows or should know too. For example, the interrogative in 1 could be uttered as an information-seeking question or as a rhetorical question. This depends on the context. If this interrogative is used as an information-seeking question, it expresses lack of information and a request for the addressee to provide an answer. Imagine a context where you are about to make some coffee for your guests and wonder how many people would like to have some. Upon asking who wants to drink coffee, the speaker makes the addressee go through a set of relevant individuals in order to provide an answer. Therefore, in the case of an information-seeking question, the speaker is not committed because she doesn't know who in the domain wants to drink coffee, and the addressee is fully engaged because she needs to do a domain search. Rhetorical questions are different. They come with a suggested answer which is already known by all interlocutors. A rhetorical question can suggest that this known answer is a specific entity from the domain. This kind we abbreviate as RQ+. To illustrate, imagine a context where both interlocutors know that John is a coffeeholic. Here, the question who wants to drink coffee conveys that John wants to drink coffee. In the case of an RQ+, we assume that the addressee goes through the same domain search as in information-seeking questions, but the answer is already given. As a consequence, the task of the addressee is less demanding. So the speaker is fully committed, and the addressee is only somewhat engaged, less engaged than in the case of an information-seeking question. But this known answer that a rhetorical question suggests is not always someone specific from the domain. It can also be nobody from the domain. This question type we abbreviate as RQ-. Suppose nobody's a coffee drinker at your workplace. If everyone already knows that nobody would drink coffee, then the interrogative who wants to drink coffee conveys that nobody wants to drink coffee. Such a rhetorical question conveys two things. The answer is in the common ground. The answer is the empty set. So the addressee doesn't even have to start a domain search for the right answer. In other words, the question already comes fully resolved. Therefore, in an RQ-, the speaker is fully committed, just like in the case of an RQ+. But since the addressee does not play any role in resolving the issue of who wants to drink coffee, she's not engaged. To summarize in information-seeking questions, the speaker is not committed and the addressee is fully engaged. In RQ+, the speaker is fully committed and the addressee is somewhat engaged, while in RQ-, the speaker is fully committed and the addressee is not engaged. The question we ask is, how do speakers differentiate the three question types in production? Does commitment or engagement have phonetic correlates? Previous literature on rhetorical questions only compared information-seeking questions to RQ-. A number of recent studies found that these two question types are distinguished in non-tonal languages like English, Icelandic, and German, although differently in each case. In addition to intonation, duration and voice quality have also been identified as markers of RQ-. For tonal languages, we know from our production study in Cantonese that speakers mark the three-way contrast between information-seeking questions, RQ+, and RQ- in production, at least in terms of the F0 contour and the duration of sentence final particles. In the current study, we explore the prosodic marking of the three question types in Mandarin WH interrogatives. We further restrict our discussion to phonetic properties such as duration and fundamental frequency. These are not the only correlates of prosody, but these metrics are easy to measure and have been targeted in almost all studies.
To answer these questions, we conducted an experiment. The data analyzed here came from 25 native speakers of Mandarin. All speakers are Chinese undergrad students at the University of Toronto at the time of testing. The target stimuli in our experiments are 8 WH interrogatives, and here is one example. They are ambiguous in terms of their readings. They can be read as information-seeking questions, negative rhetorical questions, or positive rhetorical questions. In all of them, the WH word is say or who. In addition, they have the same syntactic structure and contain the same number of syllables. These interrogatives have the sentence final particle a to make them sound more natural. For each of these 8 WH interrogatives, we created 3 short contexts so as to bias the interrogative toward a particular reading. Aside from that, we added another short sentence before the interrogative that is semantically congruent with the intended reading to help the participants get the reading more easily. The procedure of the experiment is very straightforward. In each trial, the participant first listened to and read the context in Chinese, and then the target interrogative and the facilitating sentence showed up on the monitor. The participant was prompted to read both sentences exactly as shown and as naturally as possible. For the analysis of the recordings, we excluded utterances that contained disfluency or mistakes or whose sentence final particle was omitted. Altogether, we ended up having 561 WH interrogatives for analysis. As mentioned previously, in this study, we focus on duration and fundamental frequency associated with rhetorical questions. So in what follows, I will talk about results regarding these two acoustic dimensions respectively. For duration, we first syllabify the target sentence, then we measure the total duration of the utterance. The duration of the WH word relativized to the total duration, and the duration of the sentence final particle relativized to the total duration. The results of total duration are shown first. We analyze the data with a generalized additive model for location, scale, and shape. The model suggests that the total duration for ISQ is significantly shorter than that of RQ plus and RQ minus, while there is no significant difference between RQ plus and RQ minus. Looking at the relative duration of the WH word and the sentence final particle, the model indicates that the duration of the sentence final particle is shortest in RQ minus and increases through RQ plus and ISQ. The duration of the WH word shows the opposite trend, with RQ minus being the longest and decreasing through RQ plus and ISQ. For fundamental frequency, we first estimated the F0 over voiced sections in the target's interrogative with Google's Reaper. However, due to the presence of creaky voice, F0 tracking over some regions is likely to be inaccurate. To counteract some of the inaccuracy, we further fitted a robust smooth spline over these F0 points. We then sample F0 values from this fitted spline as the F0 contour for the utterance, and use these values for analyses. We analyze F0 contours with the Functional Principal Components Analysis, or FPCA. FPCA is a way to break something down into a number of entities. Let's illustrate this idea with some toy examples. Consider the number 2020. We can express this number as 1000 plus 5 times 200 plus 2 times 10. Likewise, we can write the number 1830 as 1000 plus 4 times 200 plus 3 times 10. Note that there are some numbers that are common among the two equations, and we denote them as the grand mean, the first principal components, and the second principal components, respectively. Now we have the components. We call the coefficients for each component a score. In this case, there is a score for the first component and another score for the second component. We can generalize this idea to an F0 contour. That is, we can approximate an F0 contour with the sum of the grand mean and two weighted principal components. Here, the components can be understood as forces to deform the grand mean curve. This analysis therefore requires us to find a grand mean, the principal components, and the scores associated with the components. After we extracted these entities, we can then use the scores to summarize how F0 contours are related to one another by plotting these two scores along two axes. For example, if we have an F0 contour that had 3 for the first principal components and 2 for the second principal components, we can represent this contour as a point on this plane whose x and y values are 3 and 2 respectively. Suppose that another contour has a PC1 score of -4 and a PC2 score of -2, then this curve will be represented as another point of the coordinates -4 and -2. We first present the effects of the first two principal components. Here, the gray contour is the grand mean. We can see that the first principal component captures the tendency that when a WH word has a lower F0, the sentence final particle tends to have a higher F0 and vice versa. The second principal component, on the other hand, mainly raises or depresses the F0 contour on the sentence final particle. We now turn to the distribution of PC1 and PC2 scores. At first sight, it seems that there are no obvious clusters corresponding to ISQ, RQ+, or RQ-. But if we look at the box plots for the two scores, we do find that these three question types are different in their PC1 scores and partially distinguishable in their PC2 scores. These differences roughly translate to the F0 contours on the right, with the three question types having distinct pitch heights and contours on the WH word and the sentence final particle.
To summarize our results, information-seeking questions, RQ plus and RQ minus, are prosodically distinct in Mandarin in terms of duration and F0. Rhetorical questions are marked by longer utterance duration compared to information-seeking questions. The duration of sentence final particles as well as F0 on the WH word and the sentence final particle show a three-way distinction. Sentence final particles were longest in information-seeking questions and shortest in RQ minus. In RQ plus, their duration was between the two. F0 on the WH word was lowest in information-seeking questions and highest in RQ minus. In RQ plus, F0 values fell between the two. F0 on the sentence final particle was highest in information-seeking questions and lowest in RQ minus. And again, values for RQ plus fell between the two. Our results both echo and deviate from the observations reported in previous studies. For example, our results are consistent with the findings in German that RQ- tends to be longer than information-seeking questions, and that RQ- ends with a falling contour more often than an information-seeking question. In comparison with Cantonese, even though both languages make a three-way prosodic distinction on the sentence final particle in terms of duration and F0 for the three question types, the patterning of duration and F0 involved in marking the distinction is different across the two languages. Cantonese sentence final particles were longer in RQ- only and short in RQ plus and information-seeking questions. The sentence final particles were low in information-seeking questions and in RQ- and had a rise in RQ plus. As for the semantic features of the three question types, they can be linked to the following phonetic cues. Utterance duration may be a phonetic correlate of speaker commitment, while the rest of the phonetic cues which show a gradient three-way distinction may be correlated with addressee engagement. In this exploratory study, we show that information-seeking questions, RQ plus and RQ- in Mandarin, are distinguished in production by duration and F0, which might signal the degree of speaker commitment and addressee engagement associated with the interrogative. In future studies, we plan to further investigate the interaction between sentence final particles, question types, and prosody. We welcome any questions and comments, and we're happy to set up a virtual meeting. Feel free to email us at the following email addresses. Thank you.